welcome you here to Webinar Wednesday with Can Do. This is a beautiful opportunity to build our capacity to learn, to grow, perhaps imagine, what can be done in our nations and our organizations. Even maybe applicable to even our home fires. So welcome. My name is Michelle. I am joining from Amiskwichi, Waskagan, Treaty 6 territory. My roots, however, I'm a Saskatchewan gal, member of Coacatoose First Nation. So I feel very honored to be, a guest to these lands. So just perhaps put in the chat box where you are joining from this afternoon. We always love to hear where our Can Do family's joining from. We're honored that you made it here. And Wednesdays for me are really good days. Not only do we have Webinar Wednesday, but where I work during the day, we have bannock on Wednesdays. And I must say, I have one of the best bannock makers. One of my colleagues, she rocks that bannock. So I had some bannock and I'm ready for a nap. Just kidding. I'm ready. I'm ready for this good knowledge that's going to be shared with us this afternoon. So I hope your Wednesday is going well. I always like to take that moment, press pause. I just maybe take a deep breath in through the nose. Just settle into this moment. Life is busy out there. There's so much that, that are on our plates that we're juggling, that we're working with, that we're tending to. And so life is busy. So it's really important throughout our days to just take those little pauses and we just take a moment and acknowledge the gift of this day, acknowledge the gift that Creator has given to us, that there's goodness all around us, wherever we go, even in those dark days, hard days, the struggle is real days. I think we've all had them. Creator, brings goodness in our lives in many ways. So sometimes we got to look a little deeper on those hard days. So we just give thanks to Creator for the gift of this beautiful day, the sun rising in the east. We're starting to feel the change of the seasons coming. We have Grandmother Moon coming on Saturday. So there's goodness all around and we never walk alone. So welcome. I hope that you're ready to be inspired, to be moved, to just listen to what knowledge is being shared today. So it is my honor to introduce this powerful woman, Ruby Littlechild. And let me say, as I'm looking at her bio, what an exceptional woman. Women for me are the backbone, the strength of our communities. And so this woman exemplifies that. She has completed a Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Studies, a Master's in Education, and an MBA, a Master's degree in Business Administration. Ruby has previously worked at the Alberta Legislature building for the government of Alberta. She was a former manager of the Alberta Indigenous Construction Career Center at Norquest College and is now Director of Indigenous Relations for Atkins Realis. So she believes training, education, healing, reconciliation, respectful relationships, business development, collaboration, stakeholder engagement, and the understanding of historical and cultural awareness are key factors in successful Indigenous community economic development. And to alleviate, this is really important, to alleviate the systemic inequality and oppressive living conditions that First Nations people live under. So she advocates to encourage Indigenous inclusion in all industries that impact economy, shifts in social consciousness, higher education, and ethical practice are vital to sustainable development in our Indigenous communities in order to alleviate the prevalent inequality and uneven development across Canada. Well said, Ruby. Thank you for that beautiful and powerful bio that you shared with us. So today she's going to talk about best practices to incorporating Indigenous inclusion. So we do welcome questions along the way. Feel free to use the chat box. There also will be opportunity to have a little conversation, a dialogue at the end of her presentation. So please bring those questions to the table. We love to hear from you. So without further ado, it is my honor to introduce our guest speaker today, Ruby Littlechild.
Thank you, Michelle. I want to open by smudging myself because I'm nervous. And because I guess I was sharing earlier with Michelle, I'm a strong believer in our ceremonies, in our culture, in prayer and offerings. We can't always take, we have to learn how to give back. And I'm also trying to grasp my Cree because my parents are fluent Cree speakers, but they never taught me because of the shame that they endured in residential schools. So I'm gonna say a Cree prayer. Notawit nan kismanto witihinan mina kenaweminan anot kakisikak nianan ketua simsak napewak napesasak iskwewak iskwesak ekwa kakiao gotakak asina wakota askik. This part I have trouble with. Kita demahinan. I gotta ask my parents how to say that. Hi, thank you. That's a Cree prayer I wanted. I'm on this journey. I've been working in mainstream most of my career. My mom and dad still live in my reserve of Musqueam, Plains Cree. My dad's a residential school survivor. He saw the children getting killed, being burned. When they were doing ground penetrating radar on our res, he said they won't find them there. He said they burnt them. And I had the opportunity to go to my dad's Truth and Reconciliation hearing testimony. And my dad is 69 years old. And it I realized so much about my parents that they never talked about, the unspoken, the taboos, the residential school traumas that they endured. And this is raw stuff. This ain't 500 years ago. This is my dad and my mother who grew up in a foster care system. Anyway, again, my name is Ruby Littlechild. I have an MBA, MEd, and a bachelor's. My Cree spirit name is Kiheo Piheso Isqueo, Eagle Thunderbird Woman. I come from the Wandering Spirit bloodline. Wandering Spirit was so Big Bear, who agreed to treaty number 6 on our behalf 140 plus years ago, not long ago. He had a spiritual warrior named Wandering Spirit, and that's my bloodline. So I come from powerful spiritual leaders. And I am currently the National Director of Indigenous Relations for Atkins Realis, a global engineering firm. There's 40,000 globally. My employment background includes the government of Alberta. In 2005, I was on my last month at EI. My baby was 5 months old, and I didn't want to move. I was 30 years old, and I didn't want to move back to the res. And I emailed the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs at the time, Pearl Callahayson, begging for a job. And my friend said, "You're crazy. No one gets a job like that." But I got the job. So I was hired as a manager of her office. When I got to manage the office, I got to work with the Ralph Klein government. But I also got to see the racism at the time. But Ralph Klein was really pro-Indigenous. He inspired me. I walked into his office and he had First Nations art all over his office. He had astrology books, and I was big into astrology. I still am. And I was like, wow, I just used to love working with him. And learned so much from working with Pearl for 4 years. I then went to work for the First Nations tribal governments but that was a learning experience. I was exposed to a lot of lateral violence and oppression. The oppressed become the oppressors. And I became really aware of how oppressed our people are and still are. I then worked for Northwest College, nowhere. Oh no, I went to go work at APEGA, Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Alberta. Again, at the government, I was the only First Nations. I was actually Pearl said I was the first treaty person to work at the legislature building. She said, you're the first treaty Indian to work here, to be employed. So that was a first for me. I got to work after I left the tribal government, I applied at APEGA, the Association of Professional Engineers, and I got to meet that's what brought in my world to the world of engineering, and the professionalism, the ethics, the values. I was working in a safe place, and it was engineers have been they've been a guardian angel to my life now to this day, and I'm really grateful for them. I helped launch one of my engineer friends. I left APEGA because, what we were doing at APEGA is I had to create engineers. But at the time, there was only 68 engineers in Alberta, 68 Indigenous engineers in Alberta. 60 were Métis. Métis have the benefit of white privilege. There were 8 First Nations engineers. 5 were adopted, raised in mainstream. They had no connection to community. They were 60 scoop. And there was 3 grassroots engineers. Their parents were teachers. So I started realizing all these systemic gaps that we had across in our education system. I saw that on reserve, you get 5,000 to educate a child at the time, 11,000 off reserve. And I was realizing why we weren't how were we going to create engineers when our people in our communities, the last thing on their mind is math and science. They're hungry, they want to eat. So I had to do a master's in education. So I started researching on, I did my master's that's why I did my master's in education, is because I wanted to realize all these systemic gaps. But I also got to learn about patriarchy, oppression, colonialism, the realities, the history, which I learned in my undergrad, but just working in a white world and always being the only First Nation in the room and wondering why all these gaps and why our people are so oppressed. And then even my CEO at the PEGA, he's like, why are your people always drunk and passed out on the street? And then I realized our mainstream had no idea of residential schools. They had no idea of colonialism, colonization. And I was like, so that was a big light for me, and I was okay. So I had to educate my engineer colleagues on residential schools, colonialism. Out of my education and sharing my experience with them, they became allies, they became champions, because at the time all these engineers were coming to Alberta from all over the world because oil boom was here. So they were learning, and they became I swear to this day, they're my best friends. So they started putting money into communities, trying to create engineers, understanding the historical trauma we endured. And at the time, that's when my dad was doing his truth and reconciliation testimony. So I was learning and growing too. And we were learning about like patriarchy and why our women were so oppressed or still are, because of the residential schools and the churches and the patriarchal attitudes. So it was a very healing time in my life when I was working at APEGA, doing my master's in education and working with my engineers. And then shifts change it. My boss, who was pro-Indigenous but non-Indigenous CEO, he wanted to learn. He was so eager to learn, and he was the big boss of the company. Unfortunately, he lost his power. Our generation started coming in, taking the lead. So I was like, I saw that he was disempowered, and I lost my champion, my ally. So I just said I quit. And I said, I'm sorry, I had to be happy. I had to choose my happiness first, because I wasn't going to stay in a place where I wasn't not empowered or recognized or respected as a First Nations professional / woman. So I quit, and I told my engineer colleagues. They asked me why I quit, and they said, well, good enough. And then they said, well, we're starting the Alberta Indigenous Construction Career Center at Northwest. You should apply. So I applied, and I got the job, and I got to work again. Champions, allies came out of the woodwork. Non-Indigenous came out, and we supported, we empowered Indigenous men. we marketed, we empowered Indigenous men with training, and we marketed them to the construction companies, and we started creating Indigenous awareness training for the construction companies. But I said I wanted to be authentic, and it's so I've had to learn to talk truth even when it's taboo. And I had to talk about the realities that children were killed in residential school. And non-Indigenous, they're allies, they're champions, but it hurts them. It hurts them when they hear what happened to our people. It really, like, a lot of non-Indigenous allies and friends and champions that I met, it breaks their heart when they hear how we were treated. And I realized that it's a really sad, heartbreaking topic. And I don't do my Indigenous awareness training to break hearts or to make people feel uncomfortable. I do it because as someone who prays all the time and does ceremony all the time, I have to and can walk in truth and conduct myself in a truthful manner. So I shared, and some people run. And I've encountered I did encounter racism too. I've encountered racism everywhere I worked, because I worked in mainstream most of my career. I know racism when I see it, so I'm very conscious of it, and I feel it. I know it. I've navigated. I've always been mostly the only First Nations in the room. Res girl. Again, So I did my MBA because I was trying to create value in the Indigenous employment, the men. So I did my MBA, and that's why I had to do my MBA, because I thought if I'm going to do this job, I got to get an MBA to create value, know how to do business, which is why I did my MBA. That's why I chose education. Also, I'm a single mom, raised my daughters, no child support. In the city, I didn't want to move back to the reserve because of all the lateral violence and the oppression. My mom and dad still live on a res. My siblings still live on the res. But I knew I wanted to show my daughters a better life. So that's why I kept educating myself. And I'm not a white man, and I don't have white privilege. So I had to armor myself with higher education in order to conquer my own experiences. So I'm big on ceremony, and I always tell people, you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you come from. And without culture, there's a definite limit as to how far a man or woman can develop him or herself in a world around him or her without her culture. Without that strong line from her forefathers, no woman knows who she really is. If one does not know who she is, she cannot possess pride or dignity for herself or her people. And in 2010, 11, I started getting really spiritual. I went to a healer, and I said, I want a spirit name. I need a name. Because my mom and dad were raised. My mom comes from a traditionalist. She comes from, again, wandering spirit, but bloodline. My dad comes from the church background. So my dad was denied. My dad went to the Sundance Lodge after his mom and dad died. But he didn't go before that because he had so much respect for them, and they were strong Catholics. But it wasn't until after they died that he went running to the Sundance Lodge, and his life changed. And so I started going to ceremony. I asked for my spirit name. I've Sundanced 10 years in a row. I go to sweat lodges. I'm a strong believer in our ceremonies. Because in 1885, there was a banning of our ceremonies. We were put in jail if we were caught singing, praying, or dancing, or speaking our language. And it wasn't until the 1960s that we were allowed to be who we are again. That's a long time. And my parents, my mom and dad, talk about the Indian agent coming to the res and how they weren't allowed to leave the res, how they'd have to be, the Indian agent was coming. So they'd clean up, my mom said that we'd have to comb our hair because the Indian agent was coming. And a lot of Canadians don't realize that this is raw stuff. This is not 500 years ago. This is like my dad's generation, my mom and dad. My dad's 69, my mom's 66. and they're both still alive, thank goodness, but they both endured this. They both had to get permission to leave the reserve. They both were banned from walking into the pool hall and from speaking their language, but they still speak it fluently. Thank God they hung on to that. So anyway, I'm big on ceremony, and that's a part of my, I like to think a part of my my personal fulfillment is ceremony guides me, grounds me. I'm going to go do ceremony this weekend because I had such a crazy week. Anyway, for those non-Indigenous online, I'm First Nations, I'm status, I'm treaty. My mom and dad are treaty. I come from Musqueam. My descendants signed treaty number 6. And so there's 3 distinct groups that fall under that Indigenous peoples umbrella. And you have the Métis and the Inuit. And because I'm not Métis or Inuit, I don't speak on their behalf, because it's just, but I respect them and I respect all our journeys. Again, there's pictures of the sweat lodge. I love the sweat lodge, the powwow. I'm not a powwow dancer, but I respect the ceremony. I respected the Sundance Lodge. I love the Sundance Lodge. Our culture, for those non-Indigenous people online, it's a way of life, the behaviors, beliefs, values, and symbols that we accept generally without thinking about them. And that has been passed down by communication, ceremony, and imitation from one generation to the next. Pictures of our forefathers, our ancestors. Again, Chief Big Bear on the left in the blanket, he agreed to treaty number 6 on our behalf, and he had his spiritual warrior wandering spirit. So all my uncles and my ancestors, that's their bloodline. I come from, my uncles can do anything. They're magic. They've learned our ways. During the banning of the ceremonies, they went underground. And my mom said this. My mom said they would say they're going to go hunting, and they get permission. They get a pass from the Indian agent to say, I'm going to go hunting. But mom said they would go do ceremony. And so I'm really grateful to our forefathers who did that, who hid it and went underground. Anyway, I'm so proud of Wandering Street. He's in my blood. So this is where I'm from, Musqueam, Alberta. Treaty. This picture of my res. I'm from Ermineskin tribe. My mom and dad. I'm originally, well, okay. So my mom's from Louisville. My dad's from Ermineskin. My mom and dad got married, so we got brought into the Ermineskin Cree Nation. There's 5 of us. Small boy camp. My mom's bloodline's from small boy camp. So during colonization, they didn't want to, when they knew the Munya, the non-Indigenous were coming 140 years ago, a lot of my ancestors, they ran to the small boy camp and they hid away, and we go there to do ceremony as well. They went in, tried to protect our way of life up in the mountains. It's by Nordic. My reserve has oppressive living conditions. Still to this day. I brought my executive vice president from London, England. He of our company. He wanted to know. He wanted to meet my reserve and meet my people. So I spent 3 days with him, and I showed him, and he was shocked because he couldn't believe how we still live to this day. He saw the poverty. He said I won't get culture shock. And he said, Ruby, I got culture shock. Because he saw the kids running around with the Pampers. He saw the poverty, 90% unemployment rate on my res. People, they live on welfare. Like now it must be like $400 a month. That's because of residential schools. Our people have not grasped higher education because of what residential schools did. So there's this, and I hang out with my cousins, and they'll say, how can you just leave the res? Don't you feel like you're going into foreign territory? And I was like, no, but that's how people feel. And to this day, people feel once they leave that res line, they feel like they're going into foreign territory. And that's just a sad, and I don't like that. So I feel we're all humans, and I remember when I endured racism, encountered racism, I would cry to my healer, and I'd say, I would be upset, and he'd say, I'd say, I hate white people. And he'd say, don't say that. You say, Creator brought them here. We got to learn to live together. And it's been a journey because I encountered a lot of racism in my life. And I would be lying if I said I didn't. I wanted a better life, but we would always get kicked and knocked down living in the city. And it wasn't easy. And even taboo of racism. People don't like that word, but it's real. And if you don't talk about the elephant in the room, you won't create social change. So you have to talk about those taboo topics. Again, I'm from Treaty 6, Musqueam. There's 48 First Nations in Alberta, and they're Treaty 8 and Treaty 7 in the south. Again, you got to look at those dates. That's only 47 years ago. That's not long ago. Whereas out east, because I'm a national director, I see the dynamics nationally. I see out east, because they've been colonized longer, because they agreed to treaty way before us, I see it's just such a different dynamic being national director. But respecting where everyone's at, where every First Nation is at. I never speak on behalf of anybody because that one size does not fit all. I speak on behalf of my own experience, my own existence, my own First Nation, who I am. So you have to create those when you're doing Indigenous awareness training, when you create, and I encourage our Indigenous colleagues online who want to engage non-Indigenous, create an authentic Indigenous awareness training with the truth, with the history grounded in roots. It will help understand change and who we are and where we come from. You'll reveal the patterns in our past. You'll provide a foundation for activism and engagement, which I do. Well, I try to do that with when I approach Indigenous awareness training. And I want empathy, not sympathy, and inspire your colleagues to learn more. I'm very proud of my big boss in England. He's like the big executive global boss of the company. And and then after my run through the res and everything, spent 3 days with him. Oh, and I also showed him the Sundance. So, and it was going on at the time. And we were driving down, and we kind of hide it in Musqueam, and I taking him, and he was so in awe, and he's like, wow, can I take pictures? Because it was going on in there, the whistles, they were praying, and I said, no. He's like, you're right. He said, keep it sacred. Then I showed him the powwow, and they invited him into the powwow circle and danced with him. That's just how we are. And he was so amazed at how humble and kind we were. So he went back home to London, and he started taking courses on Indigenous, on First Nations people. He actually registered in the University of Alberta course to Canada, that module. And he learned so much, and he took more courses on stigmas and stereotypes. And it really broadened his mind. And he said, Ruby, I'm going to be an ally. I'm going to be an ally for this. So now he's a champion and an ally in this big global firm. And just last week, we launched our reconciliation plan. When I started with the company 3 years ago, I said, we need a reconciliation plan. But first of all, we needed Indigenous awareness training, because I was like, I have this mothership people, 40,000 people, and I had to educate. I had to educate the leaders and why this was important, why they had to learn. So it's been a journey, and I'm really grateful for the allies I've met along the way, and I've shared who we are with. Again, these are the 7 cultural teachings: respect, honesty, be open to sharing and listening, courage. No question is silly. Throughout my years of doing Indigenous awareness training, I've been asked every question, and it's been, I don't take no offense to no question. You have to be humble, humility, truth, again, wisdom, and love. Love so much a part of our ceremonies. Again, the treaties, here in Alberta, we were kind of colonized later towards the end, whereas out east, they were colonized longer. That's Big Bear right there in the middle. again, common barriers, which we're all aware of, I'm sure by now, is the lack of literacy and education for our people, the cultural differences, one size does not fit all. The Denes are different, the Blackfoots are different, the Crees are different, we're all Sioux are different, we all come from different backgrounds. So I refuse to speak on behalf of others. I just share my story. Again, the racism, discrimination, stereotypes, and stigmas that are still there. Unfortunately, they're still there. A lack of self-awareness in our people because of residential schools. Residential schools taught self-hate and self-loathing. So a lot of our people lack that confidence. And when I was at the college, a lot of students didn't know about residential school. These are First Nation students, Indigenous students. They didn't know about residential school or colonialism until I gave them an Indigenous 101, and they're like, my mom and dad never taught me. And I'm like, oh, like, this is our own people. And that, again, is because of the shame and oppression that we've been living in. Even like when I was doing my MBA, my PhD professors, they had no clue of First Nations people or history or residential school or colonialism. So it still was an untaught, unspoken, taboo topic. And we have to, as First Nations parents, we have to embrace our shameful history and embrace it and heal ourselves and share the goodness, our resilience. Again, the poverty, the poor housing, that they still exist in our communities, transportation. One of the First Nations that we worked with, they were put on slough land. So every year the water rises. Every year the roads go to muck. Every year they're doing emergency management. Every year the kids can't go to school because of the poor infrastructure in our communities. Again, there's an infrastructure gap too there as well, because the Canadian government doesn't fund and fix those problems in our communities. And I always share, for my own personal example, is my mother has terrible water, yellow, and it smells horrible. So I take my granddaughters live in the city, born and raised in the city, and I'll take them to my mom's house, and they hate showering there. They can't stand the smell of the water. Like they can't believe this exists, and this still exists in this day and age here in Alberta. A lot of our parents, and then we have the foster care system again. A lot of our parents lost the ability to parent because of residential schools. Love their children because children learn what they live in. That's a lot of intergenerational trauma. And when we move to the cities, we lack those networks. We lack those connections. We're kind of how do you say? Our trauma is big business, so we're kind of stuck in these organizations that. But you got to be careful because we don't want to oppress our people. We want to empower them. We want to get them on the road to education and healing, but not keep them. Again, children learn what they live. I went to school because my mom went to university. That's why I went to school. But if you got to break those cycles of wanting a good life, and you got to. That's another story. Anyway, there's the systems and the trauma that we live. There's also the communication barriers. We are taught and expected to be humble and don't brag. But I've asked my elders this too. I said, is that being humble or are we oppressed? Is that low self-esteem? So I kind of had those debates with my elders about, because I was always like, Ruby, be humble. But I'm like, so there's, but are we perpetuating our internalized oppression that we got from the residential school and the reserve system? So there's still stuff there that we have to work through. So like I said, I've learned to foster inclusion and promote reconciliation with non-Indigenous people by creating Indigenous awareness training, finding those allies, building relationships with sincere non-Indigenous allies. Usually they come and find me and they'll reach out and they'll want to learn more. I'm big on the Chamber of Commerce. Join the local Chamber of Commerce. So if you're big on business development and economic development, join the local chamber. Promote Indigenous awareness training. If they don't know it, share your culture to what you feel comfortable with. Again, we're trying to protect ourselves because of what happened, and but a lot of non-Indigenous allies and they want to learn, they want to go to the powwow, they want to go to the reserve, and it opens their eyes. Like a lot of, like I said, it makes them see who and what happened, and a lot of Canadians are not aware of that. I'm big on Murray Sinclair. I always use his videos, and I always go back to the report and the calls to action. I use that as a foundation as well. And I'm sure we all do, but I'm just sharing. Again, the history overview, knowing your history, knowing what happened. And when you know your history, you can move forward. So it's good to know that. And the big one for me, I feel as First Nations people, the biggest hit was the banning of our traditional ceremonies, because we were spiritual people first and foremost before colonization. And the fact that they tried to take that away is why our people are so lost today in the jail system and the foster system and homelessness. And they lack that strong sense of self and identity, and we really have to go back to our ceremonies and be proud of it. The Indian Act, educate about the Indian Act. The Indian Act still places barriers on us today. Be conscious I'm like conscious because I'm conscious of that the oppressed become the oppressors. I don't perpetuate it, because I've done so much research on oppression and lateral violence and gender and colonialism. Because I'm conscious of violence against women and missing and murdered, I don't perpetuate that. So I'm really cautious about how I approach and talk to our own people, because we're all coming from trauma, a place of trauma, and we're all on this healing journey. The residential schools did so much damage. I went to residential school for 3 days, but I ran away. That happened when my mom moved us to the city, and I could not adapt to the city. I hated the city. I wanted to go back to the res. And she said, well, if you don't go to school, you're going to go to residential school. So she sent me to Blue Quills residential school for 3 days, and the beds were all in her line, and I slept there, and I was like, I said, fine, I'll go back. So I ran out, ran down the road, and she met us, and I decided to embrace the city life, embrace the city life, and try fit in. That was a reason why I went to residential school. A lot of Canadians think that we don't pay taxes. We pay mega taxes. And they think that just because we're status, we don't pay taxes. Or that we still get everything for free. And that's not true, that we all look the same. But we're all different, and that we don't have education qualifications. One of the reasons why I had to, again, do so much education is because I was a single mom in a city, and I wanted to provide for my daughters. And I did that by going to school. And that education is free. I have mega student loans. I'm still paying off mega student loans because of my desire for higher education. So that's something that a lot of non-Indigenous, those are the myths, some of the myths and misconceptions that we have, that we should get over. I've been told that many times when I first started on this journey, working in mainstream. I would have people come running out of the crowd yelling at me, get off the I remember this, I was doing Indigenous awareness training, and this guy comes running out of the crowd yelling at me, get off the stage, get over it. And I was like, so I was like, I was like, oh my God, the sharks are out. I've encountered where people just don't like it. They hated the fact that I was in the room. So it's been really, it's been a journey. The fact that they don't know if we'll fit in because they think that we lack mainstream experience, that I encountered that early in my career, that we don't want to work. I always wanted a better life for my kids, that we get billions of dollars again from government, and we don't know how to manage finances. I bought my own house. So there's so many myths and misconceptions about us as grassroots First Nations people that mainstream has to challenge themselves. Bob Canoe, I'm so glad he became the first First Nations premier in Canada. Yeah, he had a really good video that I used to share in my Indigenous awareness training. And again, it talks about the stigmas and stereotypes and the labels and the pigeonholes that we encounter. All my education was in mainstream educational institutions, and I did that because I didn't always want to be pigeonholed. I didn't want to be pigeonholed or treated special just because I was First Nations, in the way it was my own competitiveness that I can make it in this world. Again, my work experience, Government of Alberta, Norcas College, and now Atkins Realis, that I'm so proud to work there as a the Indian Act. Our women are still oppressed in our communities. I'm big on speaking out against misogyny and how our women are treated. My personal opinion, our women are not valued in our communities, and they leave the res, and they're more at risk when they leave they leave the res because they're not valued, and they go try seek a better life for themselves, but they're still vulnerable and they need more supports. They need more empowerment when they move to the city. We need to keep protecting our women, honoring our women, valuing our women, speaking for them, especially the single moms. The majority of women living in the city are single moms, and they're the most what is that? There's that standard of living. They're the poorest. They're the poorest group. I've been there. That's one of the Indian agent passes. Anyway, any questions? I kind of tend to ramble. Michelle, I'll let you take over.
Oh my goodness. That you covered a lot of, I think, meaningful historical points in today's presentation. So can you share a little bit about what you do with your job right now?
So we're an engineering firm. Engineers build roads, bridges, dams. Again, a lot of Canadians are not aware of even the reserve systems and they don't know how to engage communities. So I bring my engineers to the communities and build those relationships, educate, just show them. Yeah, I'm like a liaison, but I'm also an educator. But we're also, like I said, we just recently last week we launched our reconciliation plan with the firm, and I'm so proud of it because when I started 3.5 years ago, I said we need an Indigenous framework, and no one had no clue where to start, how to get this going. So I found my allies in the company and my colleagues across the company, across Canada, and we created our reconciliation plan. We collaborated as a team, and we launched it last week. So I'm really proud of it. It entails and outlines how we're going to work and respect Indigenous communities. Because I say, I was so angry with the Australian vote. I cried. I was like, what? No, non-Indigenous do not vote on Indigenous rights, for one thing. And I was venting to my bosses, and I was yelling, and they saw how pissed off I was, and they realized that my passion's there for healing and bridging this gap of inequality that exists between us and them, and they see it. So, and because they're allies and champions, they want to alleviate that gap too. So yeah.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you can absolutely feel your passion, and I think that that's important. I love that you use the language of reconciliation, because that's what it is at this point. There's got to be some tangible action pieces. So I love that. We're going to open up the floor for anyone who might have any questions. You can put in the chat box. You can come on in. I think this is a good, opportunity to just have a little bit of dialogue. So we're going to open the floor for any questions. I mean, Ruby, you gave us a lot to ponder on and to reflect on here.
We also started a limited partnership. It's called Indigenous E3. So we have an arm of Indigenous. They lead the projects. They chase them, and us as Atkins Realis, we back them up with our engineer technical expertise. We also created a scholarship program where we have five scholarships for $5,000. But because of the pretendian issue, I backed off because I'm just very cautious about that right now, and I'm very sensitive when it comes to the pretendian issue as well.
All right. Well, it doesn't appear like we have any questions at the moment. You gave us a lot of come on in.
Hi, Ruby. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was great. Especially great because I'm kind of working on a similar thing right now. It's really not exactly part of my, I am a Indigenous relations liaison. And so I'm working on a IR presentation for like the internal company.
Yeah.
And it's very nerve-wracking, and because I have never I've took Indigenous studies at UVic and economics as well. So it's just really difficult for me to grasp that aspect of it. And I would really love some guidance. If I could send you the presentation or something like that, and you could take a look at it, that would be amazing.
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
Should I put my email in the chat? ruby.littlechild@atkinsrealis.com.
And there you go. Yeah, I'll have a good resource right here. Ken, I see your hand up. Come on in.
I've got a thought, and it's I'm not sure. I know that us settlers are required to should be doing our own education. The Indigenous communities are not responsible for our education. However, what is your opinion or your thoughts? And my thought is, could we take either company by company or settlers, the two-eyed seeing of putting together an interpretation guide? In other words, having the two sides get together and put together an interpretation guide of the common types of questions, not for right across Canada, but for a particular area or a particular company or a particular organization, where there would be a number of at one point I tried to put together an interpretation guide which would sort of attempt to explain things. And I know that's not the right way to start with hey, I've got a solution in my back pocket, and what do you think? but is there room for that?
I always work with non-Indigenous allies and collaborate with them, especially working in non-Indigenous settings all the time. So we kind of collaborated. I love non-Indigenous allies. I work with them. I'm a collaborator, but I'm also a truth sayer. And so I kind of keep us on track on again, I share my worldview perspective, and I respect non-Indigenous input and non-Indigenous allies. I don't gatekeep. Because there's so much education and sharing that needs to be done, that a ripple effect is occurring. A ripple effect starts to occur. Like, for example, in my company, now my colleagues in the USA are reaching out and saying, come show us how to do this. Because we've made such great headway here in Canada that now we're working in the States. I'm a collaborator. I value non-Indigenous input. You have to.
What my thought was putting something down in writing. In other words, having a collaborative something that could be put down in writing. It could be changed as time moves on, but there's a lot of questions that allies have, and I realize you can't nail everything down, but at least it's a start. But just talking, that's great for that community, but you don't have anything down in writing that can be passed on from person to person, and certainly could be used for 7 generations, that could be updated periodically, and maybe more frequently as the whole the world is changing. So, but if you start from someplace, and then you can build on it. But
world is changing. People are starting to get it and understand. When I first started this journey at the educational institution, and my former boss said, you know, we're going to create an Indigenous awareness training, and you're going to present it. I said, I'm sorry, but because you're a white man, if you say it, and because we're speaking to a crowd full of non-Indigenous room, I said, if you say it holds more value. And he didn't like it, but it's true. It shouldn't be like that, but that's just the reality. And me and him, we were a hit. We went across Alberta doing Indigenous awareness training. Me bringing my grassroots First Nations perspective, him bringing his story as to why he's an ally, why he's a champion. And we kind of just fed off each other, and we were a hit. And it shouldn't be like that, but that's just the reality. But I'm grateful for the allies, truly grateful.
Thank you, Ruby, and thank you for your curiosity, Ken, and in the spirit of allyship. I can't help but wonder about it's about creating those relationships with the communities and the people. And while I think there's really good merit to having a sheet of paper, I think at the end of the day it is all about building relationships too, and that is where that reconciliation piece really can be powerful, is within those relationships. So really good thinking, like just stirred my thoughts. So in the chat box, I don't know if you saw that, Ruby, there's some really good feedback. Really enjoyed today's presentation. Wonderful insight. Took some notes. Somebody from Moose Jaw, Haley from Moose Jaw, just thank you for your presentation and passion about our culture. Just some good personal points from Vicky. Very appreciated. And then Carmen, thank you from the unceded Silix. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Territory, Kelowna, BC. So really good feedback about today's presentation. We honor your passion and your fire, and just the fire about our history. And I think that that's important to
telling the truth of it, even no matter how bad it was. You have to.
Yeah.
Because a lot of Canadians, again, and like I said, they didn't know. A lot of Canadians are not aware that this was what happened to us. Yeah.
So again, from Carol, thank you so much. Great presentation. So I say to you, Keenan and Scompton, and I thank you for bringing, a bit of that story here. We honor you. We honor what you presented today. And I know our ancestors will have honored you for what you've shared on their behalf as well. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We hope to see you again soon, and be well. Make sure you tend to your spirit, take care of yourself always, take care of your home fire and the world around. We're part of Creator's world. So, may we walk in good ways. So have a good rest of the day, everyone. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Bye.